Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to the first Business-Wise Insiders of 2025. In a moment, I'll start the presentation, which will run for about 25 minutes. And after the presentation, we'll gather back together in a group, and you'll get a chance to introduce yourselves, ask questions, and share ideas about today's topic or any other business development challenge or priority that's on your mind here at the start of the new year. If you do have questions during the presentation, you can either ask them in the chat window or save them for the breakout discussion. And with that, let's turn to today's topic. So today we'll be talking about the science of B2B sales, stats and formulas for more good leads. Now, there are a few good reasons that we like this topic and revisit it from time to time. First, there's a lot of conventional wisdom about what works, what doesn't, and about how to prospect and sell. And it's easy to overlook the fact that there are actual hard numbers that can help guide your prospecting strategy and make it more successful. Second, the numbers we'll cover today or next year or the year after that will offer a snapshot of the current state of B2B business development, including the trends that are likely to shape our profession for the coming 12 to 24 months. So it's a great way to get up to speed and adjust your approach to be able to successfully navigate what's coming your way, both in terms of challenges and opportunities. And third, I think it's a valuable exercise in just highlighting how numbers-driven insights can provide value and shift your perspective. Obviously, I hope you all learned something today that you can use to improve your biz dev strategy, but I would also encourage you to seek out stats and trends in your own industry that you can share with your prospects and clients to provide a reason for them to engage, start conversations, and eventually meet with you. So I wanted to start with a little challenge to see where your mind goes first when it comes to putting numbers to some key prospecting tactics. So here are three questions on the screen. The first, on average, how many dials does it take to have a live conversation with a prospect? Second, on average, what percentage of your prospecting emails do you think will be opened by a prospect? And then finally, what is the most important element in lead gen success? Your list, your offer, or your delivery? And when I say delivery, I mean the words you use and the way you deliver them. For example, your cold call and email scripts. We'll come back to each of these at various points in the presentation to talk about the answers and how they compare to the group's initial thoughts. But I wanted to make an important point here, which is that it doesn't really matter whether you consider yourself a sales artist, where you read people, trust your instincts, and are confident you'll put on your best performance when it counts, or whether you consider yourself a sales scientist with a go-to process based on careful analysis of what works. Sales reps at both ends of the spectrum can benefit from understanding the numbers and using them to build an approach that plays to their strengths and maximizes outcomes. So let's start this all off with one overarching stat that will set the stage for our discussion today. According to HubSpot, 54% of sales reps say that selling in 2024 was harder this year than it was before. And as the biggest challenges, they cited standing out from the competition. So in a saturated marketplace, that goal of conveying your unique value is critical and increasingly challenging. The lack of high quality leads is another big obstacle. Breaking through the noise is harder than ever, so good leads are harder to come by. And then finally, reaching decision makers. So when inbound leads are less abundant, quality contact data is essential for a full pipeline. And if selling is indeed getting harder, then it behooves all of us to drill down into the latest data and the latest trends in order to get the most out of our time and energy and gain a leg up on the competition. So with that, let's dive into some real stats. So that brings us to our first set of trends and statistics where we'll focus on cold calling. And we're starting here for a couple of reasons. First, the topic of cold calling generates strong feelings, to say the least. Whether you love it or hate it, you're probably pretty sure your cold calling philosophy is the right one, and you have your reasons. Second, when it comes to measuring success, cold calling is a lot more nebulous than lead generation using digital channels like email. It takes a lot more effort to determine what works and what doesn't, and even the best data can be imprecise. But that doesn't mean there aren't hard numbers that can help guide your strategy. So as we set out to determine whether cold calling is worth your time and how to craft a prospecting strategy that makes the best use of your cold calling time, we need to know how much time really goes into each successful call. According to Jason Bay of Outbound Squad, it takes 20 to 25 dial attempts to make one completed call. And according to Gong Sales Intelligence, only 1.5% of completed calls lead to a positive outcome, like an appointment. And a completed call in this context is one where you actually get a live prospect on the phone. Now, these may be different from your own experience or what you've read, but they're certainly in the range of what a typical B2B sales rep can expect in terms of cold calling metrics. And if you use our figures and take them to their logical conclusion, it reinforces the concept that cold calling isn't easy. It can take between 100 and 250 dials just to set one appointment. But there's also an optimistic way to look at these stats because the average sales rep isn't very good. The best sales reps, using the right combination of tools, knowledge, and skills, can achieve much better results. And the most important thing you can do is to spend your cold call time wisely. When you build a cold call list of your absolute best prospects and focus your valuable cold call time there, your success rate will go way up. So how do you ensure your cold calling strategy is focused on the right prospects? And our statistic here is that sales reps spend up to 40% of their cold calling time looking for someone to call. When you think about that in combination with the previous statistic, it's pretty staggering. With so many dials required to complete a call, every second of your cold calling time is precious. And some reps are spending as much as 40% of that time not making dials and are instead searching for people to call in the first place. Now, the corollary is that when you start off with a list of top prospects, you can spend the majority of your cold call time actually making dials, and over time, you'll set a lot more appointments than if you're constantly in search mode. Finally, once again, prioritize. Even if you use BeWise or another similar tool where you can instantly access contact info for thousands of prospects, it's critical to be as focused as possible. Sales reps should have more than one list. They should have multiple tiered lists tailored to their various prospecting channels. And with cold calling, it's all about those very top prospects. And our third cold calling stat brings us full circle and helps us answer the question, does cold calling actually still work? And this stat is from a Rain Group survey within the past couple of years, so it's a true reflection of today's environment. 82% of buyers have taken a meeting after conversations that started with a cold call. So the next time you hear someone in a sales talking about how much they hate cold calling or how much they hate receiving cold calls, remember this. In practice, it still works. It's still far more common than not for decision makers to have had conversations resulting from cold calls. And part of the reason for that is the difference between cold calling in the abstract, which most people consider to be negative, and cold calling in practice, where sales reps who are persistent and who speak to their prospects' challenges and priorities can create real opportunities for constructive engagement. Now, moving on, here's one stat that really shows how much the B2B sales landscape has changed over the years. 96% of B2B buyers research products online before purchasing. A couple of years ago, the number I cited here was 90%. So if anything, it seems like this trend is only increasing. This probably isn't all that surprising given the explosion of digital selling over the past several years, but the point it underscores may not be what you expect. Since buyers are more informed than ever, your role as a sales rep has fundamentally changed. Your job is no longer to identify pain as a way to introduce prospects to your solution. In other words, to introduce new choices in their path to solve problems and address priorities. Instead, your job is to streamline and clarify your prospects' choices by offering information and insights that they don't already have. As a result, despite the fact that we operate in an increasingly digital landscape, the value of human guidance has increased. And the best way to deliver that guidance is in an actual human conversation, like a cold call. To close out this section, I just wanted to offer a few quick bonus stats on voicemail, mainly because of this first stat, 60 to 80% percentage of calls that go to voicemail, only 10% are returned. So obviously voicemail is a central piece of the cold calling landscape. 48% of sales reps never make a follow-up attempt after an initial cold call. And the number of voicemails that an average sales rep leaves per day is 70. And the point here is that voicemail is really an increasingly critical element of a successful cold calling strategy. So I wanted to offer a few tips here that you may want to try to improve your voicemails and generate more callbacks. One is to combine voicemail with email. Don't rely solely on your voicemail. Instead, use it to set up a follow-up email or vice versa. Send an email first and then follow up with a voicemail. Two ideas for what to include in your message. One is to reference an opportunity. So mention a benefit or opportunity specific to the prospect you're calling that you can help provide. Number three, reference a competitor. Mention one of your prospect's competitor companies that's a client of yours. It's a great way to sort of spark curiosity and urgency on the part of your prospect. Fourth, keep it short. Don't overwhelm or annoy your prospect with too much info. Keep your voicemails under 25 seconds. Even in that tight time frame, repeat your contact info. Make it as easy as possible for your prospect to return your call. And then practice. Successful voicemails sound neither rigid nor casual. And you really have no excuse to rehearse it so you can deliver it confidently and comfortably because there's no prospect on the other end. It's you just reciting words into the phone. So rehearse often to strike that right balance. All right, so moving on. Our second set of statistics deals with email prospecting, and 2 points before I dive into this section. First, we all send and receive a lot of emails, but for the purposes of this presentation, we're focusing on one specific kind of email, the kinds of emails that sales reps send with the goal of starting a conversation and setting an appointment with a new prospect. If you're not already sending these kinds of email and campaigns on a regular basis with a well-considered strategy, we'd be more than happy to discuss how and why to start. Secondly, I want to encourage you to think about cold calling stats and email prospecting stats not as two separate sets of information about two distinct prospecting methods. Instead, think about what the stats about cold calling say about the relative merits of email prospecting and vice versa. Because the ultimate goal here is to find the right mix of prospecting methods and how precisely to use different methods in concert with each other to achieve the best results for your effort. So we started out our cold call stats with dial attempts required to complete calls and set appointments. Similarly, I wanted to start our email prospecting section off with some baseline figures about what to expect as far as opens and replies. As our clients know, we offer email lead gen services using a couple different approaches, and what we typically see as far as results are an open rate in the range of 10 to 25% and a reply rate in the range of half a percentage point to 3%. But just like with cold calling, it's important to have a realistic set of expectations for email prospecting. Just because email may be less labor intensive doesn't mean it's automatically going to be more successful. And that's compounded by the fact that only a small number of those replies will be prospects eagerly accepting your request for an appointment. Most will be along the lines of, I'm happy with my current vendor, or I'm not interested, or reach out later. But because email prospecting is easily measurable, you know pretty quickly if a particular strategy is working, so you can continuously refine and improve. Our second email prospecting stat gets at the most common objection to email lead gen, which comes from both senders and receivers of email, that cold email basically amounts to spam. Now, this stat is a pretty strong refutation of that notion. 57% of email recipients consider a message spam not because it's unsolicited, but because it isn't relevant to their needs. So just like with cold calling, if you root your email prospecting strategy in providing value to your prospects on something that's relevant to the goals and challenges they're looking to achieve or address, they're much less likely to consider it spam. And building on the previous statistic where we set expectations about what kinds of responses you might get, value and relevance in email prospecting often comes down to demonstrating what the prospect gets from an appointment, even if they never become a client. It's that value that will turn a not interested into a conversation and ultimately into a meeting. So here's a new stat as of, I believe, last year when we covered our stats and formulas at the beginning of the year. And this reinforces some of the themes I've already touched on. Following up with a prospect multiple times can double your cold email response rate. So whether it's email or cold calling, we've talked about how often sales reps give up after a first attempt, and this shows how big a mistake that can be. Again, the inbox is a crowded place and not every message gets through every time. Follow-ups remind prospects that you're there and increase the odds you'll reach the right prospect at the right time. And finally, when it comes to ensuring regular, consistent follow-up, automated campaigns where you send a series of sequenced emails to the prospects in your audience are a real game changer. And finally, to return to the point that the effectiveness of email isn't independent from the effectiveness of cold calling and vice versa, here's a stat that really drives that point home. According to SalesLoft, response rates are 77% lower for prospecting cadences that use only email and 91% lower for prospecting cadences that use only cold calls when compared with multi-channel cadences. So if you're only using the phone or you're only using email, you're getting only a fraction of the responses that you'd get with a multi-channel approach. Now, there are a lot of variables here from how many channels you use to the length and frequency of the touches in your cadence, but it just can't be overstated how important it is to use more than one channel these days because each channel has a clear role to play in your cold outreach cadence. Of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't include some stats about AI, since even though AI is everywhere, there doesn't seem to be a clear picture or consensus about whether and how you can use it to boost your sales results. We actually did an insider session last year where we looked at whether generative AI tools like ChatGPT could write prospecting emails that were clear, concise, human-sounding, and insightful. And while AI fell short in some key areas, it showed that it can serve as an effective email writing resource. Excuse me. It can give you something to work with. It can revise what you've written to fix mistakes and make it clearer. And if you use it right, it can save you time. For those reasons, it's probably no surprise that 38% of marketers that use AI use it to write emails, and that 95% of those marketers rate it as effective or very effective for email creation. On the flip side, even in the age of the chatbot, full 82% of sales reps say building relationships with people is the most important and most enjoyable part of selling. So it has to be a balance. AI should be viewed as a tool that, when used effectively, can help you start conversations where your humanness takes center stage, because that's what creates trust and closes deals. So now we're going to turn away from statistics and toward a few formulas that we like to use to help our clients generate more and better leads. These aren't necessarily scientific, hard and fast rules, but rather frameworks that can help you ensure your focus is in the right place. The first formula is the 40-40-20 rule. Now, previous Insiders attendees have heard us talk a lot about the 40-40-20 rule before. We talk about it in relation to all aspects of sales and lead generation, and it helps us stay focused on the big picture. It's the idea that the vast majority of lead gen success comes from two basic concepts: your list and your offer. So often, sales reps are focused on the other, what to say to prospects, and to a lesser extent, the offer, the specific value your prospect gets. And they kind of forget about the importance of the list, or they overlook how important it is to invest time in crafting a list that's really focused. But if you start off by focusing on who you're talking to and then the value you're providing to those prospects, your biz dev strategy will be way ahead of the game. So here's another way to think about it. If your cold calling or email prospecting isn't generating the results that you'd expect, your first instinct might be to tweak your cold call script or change your email subject line. Instead, think about who you're targeting and whether you're providing real value at every step of the process. If you address those pieces, you may find that your basic scripts are fine, and that it was the underlying fundamentals that needed more attention. Let's take a look at another one. So here's a statistic slash formula about speaking versus listening on your cold calls. In previous years, we've leaned heavily on what's known as the 70-30 rule, which holds that sales reps should spend 70% of their time listening and only 30% of the time talking. And while that may still be true for first-time appointments, that may no longer be true for the initial cold call. The company Gong Revenue Intelligence found that in the context of cold calling, the most successful reps actually talk slightly more than they listen. And that emphasizes a really important point about today's B2B sales prospecting landscape. As I've mentioned, you need to demonstrate the value your prospect receives from a conversation or meeting. And you can't really show your value in the tight confines of a cold call if all you're doing is asking questions and listening. Instead, you may need to talk a little more to show that you have ideas, insights, and experiences that will help your prospects solve problems and address priorities. And to put an even finer point on it, you have to do it really quickly. Think about it as if you have 5 seconds to earn 5 minutes. In other words, if you're not clear at the very beginning of the kind of value you're going to provide, your prospect won't give you any more of his or her time. And then one final framework for you as you look ahead to 2025 in terms of goal setting. I came across this a couple of years ago and found it very helpful as we think about building that consistent process that all sales reps need to generate results over time. It requires striking the right mental balance between the daily grind on one hand and those big annual goals we always think about at this time of year. The idea is that we overestimate what we can accomplish in a day and underestimate what we can accomplish in a year. This is especially true in sales, where the process can feel like it's failing on any given day, where you didn't do what you wanted to or get the results you were hoping for. In those moments, remember to zoom out and stick with it, because if you do, chances are you'll be surprised at how much you can achieve over that long term. Thanks again to everybody for attending today. In just a moment, I'll stop sharing my screen and we can have a breakout discussion, but appreciate you attending and look forward to seeing you next month.